I do hope this goes down as as a legendary, rumble for immunotherapy or whatever it may be. Before I welcome our debaters onto the stage, I'd like to say a few words about this format. It's arbitrary, right? A debate is just a rhetorical device. It's designed to give us a deeper perspectives and honest and unique insights beyond what we might normally get from just a presentation. This is, it's conflict for the sake of intellectual rigor, right? So to make that possible, our two debaters tonight, on obviously I haven't even mentioned the subject yet, it's bispecifics versus cellular therapy, in terms of which will have a greater impact on cancer care. So to discuss that, to really explore that rigorously, our two debaters have agreed to play roles for our benefit. And I'd like to welcome them to the stage now. I'm not sure whose stage right and whose stage left, so I'm going to say in this corner, we have Dr. Carl June, from the University of Pennsylvania, obviously a pioneer in the establishment of CAR T therapy. This corner. Oh, very good. See, he's come in full mufti. Good. And then in this corner, we have Dr. Dan Chen from IGM Biotherapeutics and a pioneer in developing PD-L1, as well as well known as the co-author of the cancer immunity cycle, excuse me. I had the excellent, perfect. I had the privilege of interviewing both these guys at great length. For the book. So just to be clear, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to be directing questions to each of these inoculated gentlemen, and each of them is going to represent an extreme all-or-nothing position. They're going to be arguing their approach for their approach and strongly against the other approach. Again, just so that we can explore the pros and cons of these approaches in a novel and entertaining way. So this isn't about academia versus industry or Carl versus Dan, or it's really not even truly about CAR T versus T-cell bispecifics, since both men, I know, believe in a future that includes both approaches, and we're going to get a chance to hear about that. They're reasonable people, but it's a lot more fun to have them go at it. So let me get out of the way, ring the bell, and if we could all, I guess we just did, thank them for being brave enough to take part in this exercise. I'll direct the first question. Okay, so this is for these first questions I'm going to ask. There's going to be we're going to allow a 2-minute answer, followed by a 2-minute rebuttal from the other side, and then we return to the original answerer for a 1-minute last word. So the first question is to you, Dan. CAR Ts have been shown to be hugely effective new therapeutic. They can even promote immune memory, given that they're engineered with co-stimulatory molecules. Can bispecifics really hope to compete with this level of effectiveness and sophistication?
Thank you, Charlie. Wonderful question. Obviously, we've seen the impact of CAR T on human cancer already, and it's very impressive. But I would call out a few key ways to look at the data that we have today. I'm going to make 3 points here. First, when we talk about the efficacy of CAR T, we're really talking about a second-generation CAR T. The first-generation CAR Ts only had the CD3 binding domain. It didn't have the co-stimulatory component, and it just wasn't as active. And we're essentially comparing that first-generation CAR T, second-generation CAR T, to a first-generation T-cell engager, which has been impressively active clinically without co-stimulation. So it's not a fair comparison to look at those two data sets. Number two, these are not head-to-head trials. We're not looking at randomization, and we recognize that the CAR T studies have been done with a lot of patient selection. It's part of how you are able to use CAR T safely and ethically for these patients in high unmet medical need. So if you look at them, you can see the differences between CAR T and T-cell engager studies in terms of age, in terms of LDH levels, and in terms of tumor burden. These are not the same patients. Furthermore, it's not even CAR T versus T-cell engager here, because recognize that CAR T has a conditioning regimen up front. And that happens during a period of time where the cellular therapy is made. These are not fair comparisons. Let's reserve the actual activity for true head-to-head studies. And then finally, my third point is that if anyone saw the plenary at ASH 2020, you saw how powerful a CD20, CD3 T-cell engager could be. It has essentially the same durable, complete response rate in patients post-CAR T, so failed CAR T, as opposed to pre-CAR T.
Okay, great. Dr. June?
Well, thank you, Charlie. And Dan, I mean no disrespect, but Julie just showed the first, Blino was FDA approved in 2014, and the first CARs were approved in 2017. So we had a number of opportunities to treat people who had relapsed off Blino on our trials at Children's Hospital and the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm afraid it's a no-brainer. We had many kids go into durable remission who were refractory to Blino. So in a head-to-head that way, I think we have some indication that there are indications that the CARs are more potent. Now, one reason, I think, and it hasn't been brought up, is the PK differences between a soluble, water-soluble molecule, such as a recombinant BiTE or bispecific engager, and the CAR T-cell who travels by active penetration. So if you have a cold tumor, T-cells can get in, but Rakesh Jain and Lou Weiner have shown that the interstitial pressure is higher in solid tumors and that water diffusion limits the antibody penetration. I haven't seen direct studies of that with BiTEs, but my prediction is that an active diffusing cell will do better in that circumstances. In addition, we found in our trials at Children's Hospital that all the children had CAR T cells traffic into the brain as assessed by cerebral spinal fluid. And I don't know the water and blood-brain barrier penetration with a BiTE, which I imagine is probably not as good. So I think it's going to depend in part where the disease is and resistance loci.
All right, and we've got 1 minute for Dan for you to respond.
So it's interesting that you raised the experience of whether someone had prior Blina or in the case of T-cell engagers, prior CAR T. I would suggest that the data we saw at the plenary at ASH 2020 for mosunetuzumab, the CD20, CD3, was a larger experience than a single site experience as to pretreatment. So I think it's easier for me to sit here and say that T-cell engagers have a lot of activity post-CAR T, in CAR T failures, which is pretty impressive when we think about how powerful the CAR T approach can be. Now, in addition to that, I don't think we're really here on stage talking about Blina versus Yescarta or Chimera. I believe we're here talking about the future of the field. What will the impact of T-cell engagers be? What will the impact of cellular therapy be? And as we think about, for example, the future in solid tumors, I would suggest two major differences for a T-cell engager as we think about solid tumors. One, we know antibodies and peptides penetrate tumors very well, including in the brain, based on imaging studies. And we understand that the activity of a T-cell engager in a solid tumor lesion is likely driven by T cells that are present there, and we know how to get T cells to solid tumors.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it there. Is it getting hot in here, or is it just me? Wow. All right. So continuing on, this one is for you, Dr. June. CAR T has been shown to be enormously effective in many cases and also extremely expensive in all cases. Is it realistic, given what goes into development and that cost factor, that this could be really the path forward, the path we should be taking right now, especially?
Well, that's a great question, Charlie. At this point, clearly the biggest limitation with CAR T cells is their logistics and the cost of manufacturing. But as Dan said, we're really talking about the future. And we've heard today, there will be huge reductions in the cost of these early stage CAR manufacturing as the industry works on this. So in 5 years from now, I think we'll see a half log to a log reduction in the cost of goods. And we heard, for instance, from Fate Therapeutics today, cars that are made in master cell banks, using, for instance, iPSCs. So I think in the long run, we're going to see the cost of goods come down, and there will be specific indications. But I think the main advantage of a CAR T will be the synthetic biology aspects, which are, and I spoke about this morning, the ability, for instance, to genetically remove cells or add in or genes to T cells. It will always be more labor and cost intensive, but a synthetic immune system, I think, will always beat a natural immune system. And I think that's, so there are areas where it won't matter, and you want to do the cheapest and easiest way to go, but there are some tumors that I think will never respond without synthetic enhancement to the cells. The major challenge to the field now in solid tumors is exhaustion, T-cell exhaustion. We heard a lot about that this morning, and there are some ways around that. But that's where genetic engineering, I think, gives the one major difference.
And 1 minute, back to you.
So I think this is a place where Dr. June and I disagree. I disagree that an endogenous immune system response is second to a synthetic immune response. I think they're both important, but if anything, I would favor the power of the endogenous immune response, and we saw that in the development of PD-L1 and PD-1 inhibitors. But to the actual question, I have 3 quick responses. In terms of access, number 1, CAR T cells are micro machines. They take a lot of work to make. That's reflected in the cost. Number 2, in terms of allo and the idea that we can have off-the-shelf cellular therapy, I think it is a exciting area, but I do not believe that cellular therapy will ever truly be persistent the way we would like to see cellular therapy to be persistent. It's just not the way our bodies are wired. It's not, the immune system is built specifically to avoid persistence of a foreign type of an introduced cell. And honestly, if we could solve that problem, I would assume that viruses that are pathogens for our bodies would co-opt that very quickly. And so it's a dangerous path to be thinking down. And finally, as scientists and clinicians, I think our job is to improve not just healthcare in the United States, not just in the Western world, but around the globe. And one of the things I think I've been most proud of is work that we're doing at SITC to try to bring immunotherapy to places that barely have healthcare. And I see that as a possibility for T-cell engagers, perhaps more difficult for cellular therapy.
We went over a little bit because we've lost our clock. Is there any chance of doing that? While they work on that, you've got a minute plus whatever I don't know about because we lost the clock.
Well, Dan, that's well put. I think, but the answer is we want curative therapies and one and done, and that's something cell therapies can do where it's not recursive. So there's many cases, at least the initial generations of bispecific engagers are really a bridge to another definitive therapy, at least in some diseases, so that the CAR cells can be standalone without requiring, for instance, a bone marrow transplant. So clearly both are challenged in the area of solid tumors at this point. But I think one and done therapies are what we need in undeveloped economies. But I actually think that there are investigators now actually using injectable ways to make CAR T cells in vivo. And if we can get to that point, then without having to do the ex vivo manufacturing, then we could actually have a deployable one-time therapy in underdeveloped countries.
Okay, that's excellent. The gloves are clearly off here in Madison Square Garden area. So what we have now is a speed round. This is obviously an enormous topic. It's quite hopeless to try and do it all. So I'm going to really open it up. This is going to be a series of 1-minute responses to each other, like a a more Oxford-style debate, if you will, but with a little bit of urgency. And I may add a few more prompts in here, given the fact that you've answered some of the questions that all came in. So this is also based on a totally hypothetical situation, so it's much more fun. If you can imagine a world in which a sitting president slashes funding into research by significant numbers, where a stock market crashes due to a pandemic panic, funding dries up, and then some more extreme version that I can't even get into that forces a real Sophie's choice. We have to pick one direction forward, and you two represent the two directions. This one starts with you, Dan. Why is your choice? Why are bispecifics the way forward, and why is CAR-T not the way forward? And if you want to address anything in terms of speed of innovation from target identification to dosing the first patient, or what's best poised to take advantage of the technology that's right there, and not only to leapfrog perhaps, but maybe even to provide a bit of a wow factor to attract funding back in this apocalyptic scenario. But I think, go for it. I've eaten half of one of your minutes. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I'm not sure if this is a multiple choice question, but I clearly believe that T-cell engagers would be what we would take forward. Clearly, in a setting where things are not working well, we certainly don't have the funding and resources to develop CAR T-cells, let alone treat patients with CAR T-cells. Recall, that is the end of a therapeutic approach. We need to be able to treat patients. If we're limited in what we can do, T-cell engagers should approximate or even exceed, in my opinion, cellular therapy, and that's what we would choose to take forward.
Well, Dan, in the world where we have no research funding, we have a president who's just said we don't have a coronavirus epidemic, and this is why I'm wearing this, so that you all get used to wearing one yourself, because we are in the middle of an epidemic. In the future, CAR T cells will be made cheaply. You have to remember that when Genentech launched rituximab and you were involved in Herceptin, they were very expensive to manufacture, and the cost has come down by probably 2 orders of magnitude. We will see the same thing with cellular therapies, and we're seeing some of that at this meeting today. So I think that is something we can count on. And what we actually need to address is a scientific challenge of the solid tumor microenvironment complexity.
Well, so it is my turn here, yes?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Clearly, the gloves and masks are off now. I don't want to turn this, even though access is extremely important, I don't want to turn this into an access debate. This ultimately is not about how much money we pay for a therapeutics that require a lot of research are unfortunately expensive. This is ultimately about efficacy, and as you say, we need to do everything we can to be curing our patients of cancer. And I think T-cell engagers give us the best chance. I know that may run counterintuitive to many of you in this room, primarily those that work in cellular therapy, but remember, the majority of work in cellular therapy and CAR T-cells today is in hematologic malignancies, where we interpret the efficacy through the lens of log kill. Can you kill every single lymphoma cell in the entire body and give someone a cure and be a one and done? The majority of human cancer is not going to approximate our ability to just drive immediate log kill.
During your response.
Well, with all due respect, and I have to disagree with that, I think the goal of our therapies is not chronic conditions, but actually a cure. And it does happen with checkpoint therapies at some point, and at least in some cases it looks like those are sterile eliminations of tumor cells. So now how to get to there is very complex, but I think that needs to be the goal rather than chronic recursive therapies. Cell therapies, being a one and done living drug, have that potential, and that's a unique attribute over an engineered recombinant protein.
It's back to you for one, and then you get the last word, Dr. Chen.
So, Carl, I'm quite sure that the reason I became an immunologist and an immunotherapist is because I believe in the absolute power of the human immune system, and I would guess that you do too. One of the core features of the human immune system is its adaptability. it is powerful in its way that it can find that weakness that exists in the cancer and eliminate that cancer. And that in most situations where we apply cancer immunotherapy to, that's going to be the case. And so T-cell engagers give us the opportunity to adapt our synthetic immune response with the endogenous immune response and play to that adaptability. Our ability to take away the therapy and put it back, allow the immune system to reset and provide the right other signals is what makes this approach particularly promising.
Great. And Dr. June, your last word.
So in summary, when you have a tough tumor, I think cell therapies are where you're going to want to go. Julie showed their lovely work in models that they're developing with tumors with bispecific engagers for solid tumors. And basically her control that was not curable was a KPC mouse, if you remember, the P53 deficient and KRAS mouse tumor. We can cure those at our institution with properly decked out CAR T cells in a mouse. So in very difficult tissues and tumors, I believe that engineered cells will give us a real advantage. But in the long run, I think, and we actually have examples of this now, we've combined bispecific engagers with CARs and had responses beyond what we would get with either one alone in early pilot trials. So I actually think we're going to live in a world where we combine them rather than do a one or the other.
Getting slightly ahead of my questions. Your eyesight's better than I thought. I should protect that more. And of course, we're running out of time. So this next section is going to be extra short. It's also a complete reversal, so I hope you can make the shift. I'm going to ask you now to step out of your positions and to actually make the most effective, devastating argument against yourself that you can, essentially to show us where the weaknesses in your argument were if they weren't exploited. And that you get 30 seconds for that, so we're splitting this minute, I'm sorry. Oh, and I'm sorry, Dr. June, that's you first, because you were just speaking about it. I think it's most interesting.
So I think the Achilles heel of autologous CAR cell therapies is immune senescence. Which doesn't really occur in mice, so that if you have, as we have in the cancer epidemic, more elderly patients, there needs to be a regenerative medicine approach to make the immune system work. I think this, the BiTEs require endogenous T cells as well, and the CAR cells, you can't manufacture them if they're dead at the start.
All right, and Dr. Chen?
So I'm a strong believer in not only science, I'm a strong believer in engineering. And I think it is one of the greatest opportunities all of us in this room have over the next 10 years. 15 years ago, it was all about targets and understanding cancer biology and human biology. But today, we sit at a point where we can do things that feel like and really approximate science fiction. And I think nothing is more of a poster child for that than cellular therapy. Engineering of cells allow us to do things that, in some cases, there is no other way to approach.
All right, well, that's great. You're actually bleeding into the next section anyway. You didn't poke holes in yourself, though. That's fair enough. I'd say you each have a minute here. I'll go to you first, Dr. June, and then Dan, you can finish up. It's not really a closing statement. You don't really have to argue necessarily the other side, but can you give us a more realistic, you stepped out of your roles entirely. Thank you for playing the game and taking these extreme positions. Can you give us more of a sense of what you do see, how this fits in, how your approach, that approach, all approaches fit in together, and do it all in less than a minute?
Yeah, I think that we have the tools now that hematologic malignancies are mostly an engineering problem, that they will be solved with the tools we have, including bispecific engagers and CAR T cells. Solid tumors, I think it's naive to think that any single moiety is going to be sufficient. So we need early detection. We need optimized CAR designs, engineered cells of all kinds, not just T cells, but NK cells, stem cells, and macrophages and so on. So I think that will increase what we can do. And I think as well we're going to see the use of other synthetic reagents such as engineered viruses more and more. So that our toolbox is there.
Okay, great. That's in order for us to actually make it out of here in time for the next session.
Do I get a closing?
Oh God, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you very much. Fair enough. I'm an amateur.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
I think that we live in a world where cancer is one of the greatest threats to humanity that exists. We know that today from the number of deaths that are accountable to cancer. Cancer is an extremely difficult foe to be fighting. And I was prepared to come into this argument and really position that T-cell engagers and CAR Ts are sort of like asking yourself whether you prefer a bicycle or a horse. In a horse, you have an animal that's living, that can make decisions, you train it, and it does what it wants to do. You gotta feed it. It may make some bad decisions, but it may make some decisions that you could never have made yourself. A bicycle is powered by yourselves, ourselves, and we can drive it or ride it the way we want to. But against cancer, I think it's very, very clear to me that it is really the ability to draw on both the horse and the bicycle to ultimately defeat our enemy.
I would have lost that metaphor had I truly shut this down, and I'm terribly sorry about that. This was fantastic. In order to thank the vote, let's do an applause meter.
That was fun.
Dr. June.
That was great.
Dr. Chen. All right, I'm calling this a draw. Science is clearly the winner. Thank you, everybody. You can continue this conversation online with the hashtag from here or hashtag IO360. Great debate. That's an 8 in the middle of great.
Instead of a bicycle, we need a car.
Oh, I'll give you, Dan, you've got 10 seconds. Thank you both. Thank you, everybody.